cold, and dampness from a Chinese medicine perspective, and how those show up in your health and your reproductive health. Now, I'm making this video today because a lot of people have requested this, and I think these concepts are important to understand when talking about your reproductive health from a Chinese medicine perspective. Now, I also want to start by mentioning these are not necessarily easy concepts to understand, but I'm going to try to explain this in a way that is simple as possible. And it may be helpful as you listen or watch this to take out a piece of paper and a pencil and jot some notes down so that the concepts kind of make sense. So I'm going to break this down in two separate ways because I want to break down the internal functions of heat, cold, and dampness, and then also how food contributes to that. And we need to talk about those separately to begin with, and it will make sense by the end. And I have some notes here with me today for this because, again, it can get a little confusing and I don't want it to. So let's try to make this as streamlined as possible. And to start, we need to start by understanding the concept of yin and yang energy in Chinese medicine. In Chinese medicine, our bodies are always meant to be this perfect balance of yin and yang energy, and nature is meant to be this balance of yin and yang energy, right? Winter balances out summer, spring balances out fall. So in Chinese medicine, yin is thick fluids in our body. Yin is sex hormones. Yin is also the cooling function. And that's going to be the most important part to understand throughout this conversation is that yin is cooling. Yin is nighttime, it's rest, it's restoration. On the other hand, we have yang energy. And yang energy is heat. It's the fire in our body. Yang is the heat in our body. It's what warms us. It's what gives us energy. It's what gives energy to the other organs in our body. Yang is energy. It's moving. It's warming. It's activities, it's daytime, it's everything that yin isn't. And now our bodies are always meant to be a balance of these yin and yang energies. So what happens when we don't have enough yin energy? So keeping this in mind that yin is the cooling aspect of our body and that yang is the heating aspect of our body, let's start by looking at internal heat in our body and how that shows up and why it shows up in our body. So signs that you might have some internal heat in your body can show up as things as feeling hot, like being someone who runs hot, having an aversion to feeling hot, not liking feeling hot, preferring cool environments, craving cold drinks or cold food. It can show up as a red face, red skin rashes, red acne. A red tongue is a big sign. It can show up as ulcers. It can show up mentally and emotionally as feeling very agitated, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, and headaches because heat rises. And as heat rises to our heart and our head, we're going to have signs such as anxiety and headaches. It can show up as excessive thirst because it's important to remember that heat dries things out. So whenever there's heat in the body, there's going to be dryness. And that being said, heat can show up as dry mouth, throat, hair, skin, or nails, and constipation because constipation is a form of dryness in our body as our body doesn't have enough moisture in our large intestines to push that bowel movement out. Heat can also show up as infertility. It can show, usually there's a sense of heat if there's endometriosis. Heat can create pain in the body as it creates stagnation. Again, I'll explain that a little bit more. Heat can show up as having early, heavy, or dark colored periods. It can show up as having clots in your periods. It can show up as mood swings, PMDD around your cycle as well. Now let's talk about why heat forms in our body. And again, I'm talking about just how it forms in your body and not about food right now. So heat forms in your body when we don't have enough yin energy. So remember, yin is cooling and yang is warming, and our body is meant to be a balance. We don't have enough of that cooling aspect to balance out that heating aspect. That heat will rise and we will have too much heat in our body. As I go through this, it's important to understand that most of the concepts I'm talking about are coming from a deficiency, a lack of something in your body. If you have too much heat in your body, it's never that you have too much yang energy. You can't have too much yang energy. Yang energy is our life force. That would be saying like we have too much life to us. We're going to live too long. That's not a thing. But what is a thing is not having enough yin, not enough thick substance in our body to hold down, to balance out that yang energy. And then whenever we have heat, we have dampness. So let's talk about dampness next, and then I guess I'll go into cold last. But dampness is thick fluids. It is mucus in our bodies. Dampness is a stagnation of yin resources, essentially. It's a stagnation of thin fluids or thick fluids. So it could be a stagnation of yin, which is thick fluids in our body. It could be a stagnation of blood in our body. So dampness is thick fluids in our body that stagnate. I like to think of it as mucus in the body. The same way you have mucus in your nose or throat when you have a cold, that same mucus can form anywhere in your body, and it can show up as cysts, it can show up as having painful periods, it can show up as cystic acne, it can show up as having trouble losing weight or gaining weight really easily. It can show up as feeling heavy in your body, right? Because there is a weight to this mucus in our body, to this dampness. It can show up as feeling tired or having brain fog or slow digestion or lack of motivation. Again, like this very heavy, sticky energy in our body. It can show up as diarrhea as your body tries to push out the mucus. It can show up as water retention and puffiness and edema in the body. Again, like that thick fluid just stagnating and sticking. If you want to take a look at your tongue, it will often show up as a swollen tongue with teeth marks on the side, which is kind of like a scalloped side of your tongue. You might have a greasy white or yellow coat, depending if it's hot or cold dampness. And dampness shows up in a lot of people and is one of the leading causes of infertility because dampness creates stagnation, right? If we want to think about the energy in our body or our blood in our body, everything in our body, we want to think of this like clear, easy to flow down river. But when you have dampness in your body, it's like floating down a muddy river. You're not going real fast. Everything gets stuck. So ovulation gets stuck. Your period gets stuck, so you have painful periods. The egg's not able to reach the sperm and implant because there's this stuckness to it, right? There's this stagnation. So dampness is a big cause of infertility. Typically, women who have PCOS will have some form of dampness, and you can listen to my last podcast about PCOS where I talk all about that. But let's talk about how dampness forms in our body. Again, not talking about food yet. Dampness forms in our body when our digestive system isn't working properly, when the energy of our spleen is slightly weakened to any extent. The energy of our spleen is responsible for digesting and absorbing the food that we eat. And if it's not working correctly, then that food gets stuck and it creates this thick, gooey substance. It creates dampness. So typically I want to say quote unquote root cause because it's still not the root cause. I'll talk about that, but the root cause of dampness is a deficiency in the energy of your spleen. And you really need to work on strengthening the energy of your spleen if there is dampness in the body. That being said, the root cause of why the energy of your spleen is deficient could be many things. And usually it goes back to emotions, worry, feeling worried a lot, anxiety, overwork. There's a lot of things for the root cause of the energy of your spleen being off, but at the end of the day, it usually results in dampness. Another way dampness can form in the body is if there is too much heat. So our body is always trying to support us. And if we have heat in our body, and heat is also inflammation in our body, that's another way to think of it. When we have too much heat, our body will try to put out that heat by sending fluids to that area. And as the body is sending fluids to that area, if the heat has no place to vent, it again creates stagnation as these fluids stagnate. And the same way, when there's too much heat in the body, dampness will form. When there's too much dampness in the body, heat will form. The body will send out more yang energy, more heat to try to move that dampness. And again, as that heat gets stuck, we end up having a situation of damp heat in the body, which is very common. And lastly, I want to talk about internal cold and how cold shows up in the body. So internal cold will happen when there's not enough yang energy, right? When we don't have enough of that yang energy to warm our body. Blood is a yin substance, but blood also warms our body. So when there's not enough blood, there will be cold in our body. So when there's not enough blood or there's not enough yang energy, we're left with too much cold in our body, too much internal cold. This can also happen from a cold exposure over time, right? If you're not properly dressed in winter, your body, you'll create more internal cold, which is why in Chinese medicine, we always say, to wear a scarf, to wear your jackets, to keep your feet covered, because the bottom of the feet is the beginning of an energy channel that goes up to our kidneys, and our kidneys is what stores all that yin and yang energy. But the best way to think of the concept of cold in Chinese medicine is think about how you feel if you were to go outside in the middle of winter when it's snowing in a tank top. Right, your body would contract, your shoulders would go in, you would be shivering, you try to keep yourself warm. Cold constricts. Cold constricts your energy. Cold creates stagnation, cold creates pain. And cold makes it hard for things to circulate in our bodies, such as blood, qi, yin and yang energy. So some signs that might show up if you have cold in your body, the biggest one is just feeling cold all the time, preferring warm things, warm drinks, wanting to be bundled up. It can show up as cold hands and feet or the entire body. Typically when there's cramping, especially like pelvic cramping, period cramping, there often, not always, is a sense of cold in it. A sharp pain that gets better with heat, that's definitely a sign of cold. Slow digestion or slow metabolism is a sign of cold, and some dampness too. Another concept is that dampness is actually cold, because again, dampness is a stagnation of thick fluids or thin fluids, and thick fluids is yin substance and yin is cooling. If you look at your tongue will probably be really pale, sometimes swollen with a white coating as well. From a reproductive health standpoint, like I mentioned, it can show up as painful periods. It can show up as delayed or really light periods as the cold is blocking that flow of blood. So again, blood warms our body. And when we don't have enough blood, often that ends up as feeling cold. We don't have enough blood, we're also not going to have really heavy periods because we don't have enough blood to support our menstrual cycle. So you might have scanty periods, you might have missed periods, you might suffer from amenorrhea. You could suffer from low libido. So our yang energy, that warming energy, is also what controls our sexual drive. So if there's not enough yang energy to warm the body, then there's not enough yang energy for our sex drive as well. You also might suffer fatigue. Again, like cold slows things down. So anything that feels like slow or heavy in your body is some form of cold or dampness, because again, dampness is cold. So to summarize, from an internal sense, when there's too much heat in the body, when the body is too hot, because that's usually because there's a deficiency of yin energy, the cooling aspect. When there's too much cold in the body, that's usually because there's a deficiency of yang energy or blood, the warming aspects of your body. And when there's dampness in your body, it's usually because there's a deficiency of the energy of our spleen, which is responsible for digesting our food. And all of these parts will work together as our body is ultimately trying to support us in the best way it knows possible. Now let's talk about how these aspects, hot, cold, and dampness, show up in our food. So first, foods that create heat are things like coffee, onion, garlic, and spicy foods. In Chinese medicine, all foods have an energy to them. Whether they're cooked or not cooked, all foods have a temperature to them. We have hot, we have warm, and we have cold. Now, you can mix hot and cold foods to make warm foods generally. But this is important to understand. When we're talking about internal things, you cannot mix hot and cold to create warmth, right? You can't mix cold plunging with saunas to create a warm environment, because again, the cold in our body is coming from a deficiency, and the heat in our body is coming from a deficiency, and external hot and external cold are not supporting either of those. So if you're a person who drinks a lot of coffee, eats a lot of onion, garlic, and spicy foods, that could be the main factor contributing to heat in your body. But the heat is still going to end up as a deficiency, as these hot foods create heat in the body. They cause a dryness that dries up those thick and thin fluids in your body that dry up that yin aspect. The way that our food is leading to feeling hot or cold in the body is, again, still coming from a deficiency ultimately. So let's talk about cooling foods. So cooked leafy greens are cooling foods. And another warming food in Chinese medicine, a pretty hot food, would be shellfish, such as shrimp, right? Shellfish that turns red when we cook it is hot because the energy is like this heat trapped into a shell, and then it's turning red, which signifies heat. Let's say shrimp is hot, cooked leafy greens is cooling. You could eat those together and that would create a warming environment. A question I often get asked, well, I have a lot of heat in my body. Is it okay for me to eat cold foods? And the answer to that is still no, because again, that heat in your body is coming from a deficiency, and we want to support nourishing your body, not further depleting your body. Cold foods, yes, they will create an aspect of cold in your body, but not the way you want it to. Cold foods are hard for your body to digest, so they weaken the energy of your spleen, which again is going to create this dampness, which is just further developing more problems in your body, right? When again, we need to be nourishing and supporting our body if we have any heat, cold, or dampness in our body. So if you are a person that runs internally hot, you need to be focusing on supporting building your inner yin energy with cooked whole foods, lots of saturated fat, lots of good protein sources. And then lastly, we have the concept of dampness when it comes to food. So foods that create dampness in the body is anything that's hard for our body to digest. So starting out, anything that does not grow from the earth or eat from the earth is hard for our body to digest. So that's packaged foods, that's ingredients we can't name, artificial sweeteners, artificial food coloring, chemicals, medication. All that's hard for our body to digest because it's foreign to our body. Other foods that are harder for our body to digest are cheese. Cheese is really hard for our body to digest because think about when cheese melts. If you melt cheese, it still has this stickiness to it, right? You pull cheese and it doesn't just flow, right? And it's that energy that we're eating in our body. So cheese is harder for our body to digest. and can create dampness and mucus over the time. Conventional milk and any dairy, again, same thing, because it's processed. It doesn't have those good prebiotics and probiotics that make it easy for our body to digest, so it's hard for our body to digest. Excluding butter. Butter is actually really easy for our body to digest because it's fermented, and butter is a really wonderful food that's so important for our reproductive health, our fertility, and building that wonderful yin in our body, which is sex hormones. Excess wheat is going to create dampness if it's processed. Again, I don't like bucketing wheat because wheat can be really nourishing and supportive for your body, but the majority of us eat really processed wheat. So if you have access to really good wheat, fresh milled or fresh grains, quality sourdough without like enriched flour and all that crap, preservatives added to it, then that can be supportive, but all the processed junk is just going to create more dampness in your body. And lastly, any food that creates dampness is going to create heat, and any food that creates heat is going to create dampness, as I explained earlier in this chat. So I hope that was helpful in helping you understand the concept of hot, heat, cold, and dampness in the body. Again, re-listen to this if you need to, take notes, maybe draw a picture, that could be helpful. But at the end of the day, the key takeaway from this is one, that if you have hot, if you have heat, cold, or dampness in your body, it's typically from a deficiency. And that external factors such as cold plunging and saunas are not supporting that deficiency, they're just creating more of a deficiency. And that when it comes to food, we can use the energy of food to support warming our body or cooling our body or creating warmth in our body. But it really needs to be done intentionally and correctly. And that cold foods, cold raw foods, has no place in any of this, right? If you are a healthy, robust person, you can have a salad every once in a while, you can have a smoothie every once in a while, but those foods are never actually supporting your health. You can enjoy them, but they're not supporting your health because they are hard for your body to digest. And anything that's hard for your body to digest is going to slow down the energy of your spleen, which is a bad thing because the energy of our spleen digests and absorbs the nutrients from the food that we eat and then uses those nutrients to turn into resources such as blood and sex hormones that our body needs for a healthy reproductive system, for a healthy fertility and pregnancy, and honestly, overall health. So I hope this episode was informative and helpful for you, and thank you again for listening.